Hi, I'm Erik Hall. I'm the digital sports editor at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I'm joined by Sandy Rosenbush, who was APSE president in 1992-93, while deputy sports editor at the New York Times. Thanks for joining me, Sandy.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
How'd you get involved with APSE?
I got involved with APSE when I worked at the Post, the Washington Post, and basically at the Washington Post sports department, whatever George Solomon told you to do is what you did. And so George came to me one day and says, I've got a great present for you. It's like a bonus. You did such a great job on the football section, and I'm so happy with your work. He's like, I'm sending you to Tampa. You're from Tampa, right? And I said, yeah, my whole family's down there. I said, you mean you're just giving me a ticket to go to see my family? And he's like, well, you have to do me a favor while you're down there. And I said, well, okay, what is it? And Eddie goes, you have to do the APSC contest judging because I don't want to do that. So I was like, I don't know any of those people. I'd been to one APSC thing, which was like a regional deal in Philadelphia with a copy editing workshop. I think back in the day of Ken Finkel, I believe, was supposed to have done it. And he had another, some sort of already scheduled deal that I think was probably paying him more money. And so I filled in for Ken Finkel, and I was like, hey, George, I don't want to spend how long do they do this stuff? Can I just go see my family? And he's like, whatever you want, Sandy, just go ahead. Just don't embarrass me. So that was sort of the beginning of those were my marching orders. Just do what I tell you to and don't embarrass me. So hopefully I fulfill those with George.
How'd you move up to being then president of the organization from that beginning?
I'm also probably the only person who wasn't actually going through the whole election process. There was how shall I phrase this? There was some attrition in the officer ranks at I guess it was in probably, if I was 92, 93, this would have been like at the beginning of 92. One of the officers had run into some legal trouble and was departing his job and was not going to be eligible to continue as an officer in the situation. And so I got a call from Steve Doyle, who sort of filled me in on this and said, he was president. I said, I'd like you to come in and this I think the guy who stepped out was not the second vice president. I believe he was the first vice president, but I can't really remember those details. I do know that he said, I'd like you to do this. And I said, well, is there an election or something? And he's like, no, I'm just going to appoint you. I said, well, I have to talk to George about this because I'm sure it'll be, take some time away from my work, et cetera, et cetera. He said, oh, no, I already talked to George. He's all for it. So I think you're going to do it. And I said, what do you think I'm going to do it? George can't just tell me to do that kind of stuff. And he goes, well, you might want to go ask him about that. So I said, okay, I'll call you back. So I went in and guess what? The next thing I knew, I was indeed moving in as an APSC officer. And it was fine. It was an enjoyable time. One of the people I worked closest with was Dale By, who was always, just always a great person to deal with and very funny too. So, I enjoyed my time as an officer, but was not unhappy to see it come to an end because it does take a lot of time.
How was that for you, balancing your responsibilities with APSC and your full-time job?
Well, even better. I added. Hang on a second. Better than just balancing my regular job. I took a new job in the middle of it with a newspaper that was co-owned at the time by the New York Times and the Post. And it was the International Herald Tribune in Paris. So I moved to Paris, and I was the only APSC officer to be living abroad while while being an officer. I came back for the judging. I came back because when it was my turn to oversee the convention that year, our convention was in San Francisco. So, I mean, I couldn't just fly from France to the East Coast. No, I had to go all the way. So it was a 14-hour flight. That was, it was what it was. But it definitely added a few challenges to life. And I'll never forget that in the middle of that, I also came back and moved from, I was hopping around at that point. I moved from the Herald Tribune toward the end of my officer tenure to the New York Times. So the Times agreed to sponsor, one of our events. And we did not have a sponsorship at that point yet for the cocktail party before before the awards ceremony, which of course we really didn't want to call it a cocktail party. I think we just called it the opening welcoming reception or some such as that. But I was honest with them. I said, people have drinks and, then they go in and get their awards and They said, how much will this cost? So I said, well, I'm told that it usually runs around $5,000. It's one of the less expensive things. It was the Hyatt Embarcadero, so it was a pretty expensive hotel. And the bottom line was they were okay with it. They said, sure, fine, put us down for that reception and $5,000. Well, we began the reception, and I think it was supposed to go for an hour. About 40 minutes hits, maybe 35. A lady from the hotel comes up to me and she says, when are you guys going to move in for your dinner? She said, I said, well, are we late? I thought this was supposed to run an hour. And she goes, oh, no, it's not the time that's concerning me. If it doesn't concern you, it won't, but it's fine with us. But I just wanted to kind of make you aware of the cost situation. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, typically these run around $5,000, and that's based on however many, the number of people you have. I think we had like about 150 people there, and how much average alcohol is drunk. And so I said, okay, so where do we stand? And she said, well, you've set a record. She said, I've never seen, she said, I think you guys have about 100 people at this reception. And she said, you've already drank more than anybody who's had 100 people at a 2-hour reception, and you haven't hit the 1-hour mark yet. So I said, really? So I said, how much more than that have we drank? And she said, well, you're just over $7,000 at this point on the thing. And I said, just one moment. So I turned around and just cried out, last call. We need to get going in for picking up our awards, guys. Get the last drink if you need one. If not, please go right on in. I tried to herd everybody in. Times paid it. They were fine. They thought it was actually kind of funny and really didn't have any problem with it. But my heart almost stopped with that. And you know what? Is it really a surprise when you think about it? No, not at all. Free drinks and fraternities and APSE all go together very well.
Yeah. What do you remember about what went into putting on the summer conventions that you were involved with?
Oh, a lot. I mean, there's just so many odds and ends to tie up that you don't tend to think about. Certainly, it was fortunate at that time. One of the challenges we didn't really tend to have to the degree that they exist now was the whole business of, room guarantees. I mean, you had to make them, but we had a pretty solid background of, having 100 plus for sure. And actually, I think this was coming off maybe Boston was either the year before this one or 2 years before it. And I think that remains the convention that had the most people was, like 155, 165, something like that. So the whole business, which, I know Jorge has to deal with now, of like just continuing to tell people, hey, you've got to sign up. Hey, you've got, if you come to the convention, but you're staying at another hotel, we don't get credit for those room nights. So, I mean, we didn't have the challenges of making sure that people got to the convention and stayed in our hotel and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't as much, but anytime you're signing contracts with a big corporation and agreeing to pay them, X thousands of dollars, it might not throw some people, but it makes me swallow very hard. So especially after that episode where we had just drank practically their wine cellar up.
Yeah. What were some challenges maybe that occurred while you were president of APSE, and how did you navigate those?
Well, I don't think we had any real disasters. I mean, like I came in, I guess, sort of in an emergency situation because of someone leaving. But the biggest thing that happened during my presidency was the beginning of the Sports Journalism Institute. It was something that was an idea of Leon Carter, who at the time was the sports task force chair of NABJ. And, I had sort of unexpectedly landed in the APSE presidency role. And we both thought, we have these groups behind us. And, if there's ever a time that we can do something that will give back to the industry and help, help the journalists that are trying to get their feet in the door, now's the time. So that year we went to the NABJ convention that was in Detroit. We went to a couple of workshops. One of them was about getting high school kids involved in newspapers. And, we brainstormed with folks and got funding from the Freedom Forum and just plunged right in. It was really great. A guy I had worked with at the Post, Leonard Hall, had left the Post and was working with the Freedom Forum. And we were able to come up with the idea jointly with them in the summer, and we had the first class in place at Norfolk State, which is Leon's alma mater, the next May. So it was very rapid fire. But that and the fact that we're celebrating 31 years of SJI this year, it all worked out really good. I mean, that's a lot of work, and that's an ongoing thing. I remember being happy when my presidency ended, just because it was like, now I have my time back. But little did I realize that the rest of my life I'd be apparently, I would be having SJI in the summer. So, yeah. But it's certainly good. And that was the thing I think I was the most proud of during my presidency.
What about APSE allowed you to springboard and initiate SJI? And do you think that would have come about without you being president?
Yeah, I don't know. We brought in the funding for it because the Freedom Forum at that time was pretty flush. Newspapers were pretty flush in general. But they gave us a grant that covered basically our first 3 years of operation. And at the time, we had never dreamed, or I guess it would have been a nightmare kind of dream, that we would be doing this every summer again for the rest of our lives. So 3 years sounded like, wow, that's great. We can do this for 3 years and see how much it produces. So APSE folks were in general very supportive. They liked the idea. And also we said, these will be students who can go right from a training program that we'll do into internships at your newspapers. And we weren't really sure how supportive people would be of that, because there are a lot of, depending on sort of the chain that you're associated with, or just the paper itself, or its agreements with the local guild. There are a lot of constrictions that are on editors in terms of picking interns. No, we have this process and we have to do it. HR says X, Y, and Z. But it turned out that the editors were very supportive. Most of our students in the program have been either women or journalists of color, and I think the initial idea from the editors was, we want to support this, and we want to sort of put our our papers where our mouth is about wanting to encourage diversity. And then to their great surprise, they turned out to be well prepared and just as good, if not better, than some of the people there. I do think I think that the funniest thing to us, and something we didn't expect, was I think the idea that we would be doing at the time a little newspaper. We did a daily newspaper during the convention, and covering the convention like a convention, like it was a Democratic National Convention, except less hostile, I guess. But we did stories, and we did news stories. And when we were at the convention in Orlando, a couple years in, we had a couple of our staffers who were at I forget which hotel that was. It was but it was one of the really fancy ones. I think it was a Ritz-Carlton, which is one reason why we don't do boot camps at APSE anymore, because can you have a boot camp at a Ritz-Carlton? That just doesn't make sense. Not to mention dorms and Hampton Inns are a lot cheaper. But we had a couple of people who were at the bar at the Ritz-Carlton. I will add, I was not there. I was still working. I was back in New York at SI at that point doing a commemorative, but I got there before the convention ended. And what had happened was they closed the bar a little early. And so a couple of our folks who were asking to get drinks, because the bartender said something like last call, and then he came around to our guys later. I wasn't there. I had no drinks. And are all my stories about people drinking? It seems to be a lot, but again, it's APSE. So they said, well, I'm sorry, you're late. We just closed. We just did last call. And they were like, no, but you said last call, but you just now came over here. And they didn't serve them. So we did a story on that. And it was, it was that this group, I think Jamel Hill was in that group. I know Greg Lee was in that group. He's the one I heard several times from about not getting a drink. I was like, I'll buy you a damn drink. Just shut the up about it. But anyway, we did a story on it. I was in New York, wasn't as fond of doing the story, but in any event, it some people got ticked off because of, well, this looks like you're criticizing us, and we're not criticizing you, we're just saying what happened. But we did have an incident, and the editors did feel invested in it, and I thought that was a good thing, that they cared what was in the paper, and they wanted it to be what they thought was, professional material. So our very first newspaper had a story about when news meets sports, I think, or when sports meets news. And it was based off of the story, again, we're going back 30 years, when the Cleveland Indian guys, there were 2 or 3 of them out boating, and they had been drinking considerably, and they came speeding into the dock and hit it, and I think 2 of them were killed. So the news, we had one of the guys who works in our program worked at the Cleveland paper, and he was a news guy at the time, but worked with SJI too. So David Squires. So Squires talked about the whole business of news and sports, and he said sometimes when you're a sports person, you don't have the background that a news person does. And he said sometimes when especially a big legally entangled story breaks out, I've seen sports departments can tend to run around like chickens with their heads chopped off. And he went on and on and on. Well, that quote ended up in the paper. And I never thought anything about it. I mean, it was harmless. It didn't say like these were incompetent fools, and we had to come in and clean them up. But so I'm at the reception, another reception, people drinking, and I'm having a glass of wine. And the late Roy Hewitt comes up to me and says, "I got a bone to pick with you." And I said, "Oh, well, what is it?" And so he said, "Well, you kind of like just SHIT all over my sports department." And I said, "What? What are you talking about?" And he said, "This story in the bulletin, it says my department was running around like chickens with their heads chopped off." And I said, "Oh," I said, "I remember that quote." I said, "It didn't say your editors were running around like," I said, it said something like, when sports departments haven't had a lot of experience with hard news, they can tend to react like chickens with their heads chopped off. And so he said, "Well, somebody should have asked me about this." And I said, "You mean like ask you, did your department act like chickens?" And he's like, I don't think that's funny." And so this went on and on and on for a while. And finally, I said, "Look, you know what? I think you're right. And I think this is a good lesson learned. I think we look at this paper, yes, as a newspaper, but as a whole training experience." I said, "I think it's training for you guys to take interns seriously and take their work seriously. But I think in my case here, if I were editing a story that was going to go in, the New York Times the next day, then it said this, I probably would have, said, well, you should go back and ask them what exactly they did, and if they felt these other guys helped them, or what this was all, or just take the quote out." So I said, I think you're probably right." And he's like, "I am right." And he said, "And if we've got people like you running this thing, I'm not supporting it." So I said, "Well, okay, I'm sorry about that." Continued and continued to go on. And finally I just said, "Well, you know what? I have not much to say other than," and it was not a nice thing that I signed off with, but I will just say there was an F-bomb involved. And that was unfortunately the last time I ever spoke to Roy Hewitt. But anyway, it was, and guess what? Roy Hewitt ended up with interns from the program, and ended up hiring at least one of them, and it was all good. But it also all comes back to, if only we had a pay as you go individuals, like a cash bar. And I tried to get APSE when I was president. They say, "Oh, they'll throw you out of office." So I gave up on that one. But I do think it would be a good idea, man.
Not a bad idea for sure. What did it mean to you when you won the Red Smith Award in 2019?
Oh, that was truly one of the high points, I would say, of my career. I mean, I never really thought of myself as, being a Red Smith winner. I mean, I certainly have written a fair amount of stories, but I'm not in that league whatsoever. But I think the fact that they did expand the definition of the award to include service to journalism, I got it, and I felt like it. Why it meant so much to me, it was, I think, the same reason it meant so much to Leon. A year or two later, was the fact that it felt like it was an award for SJI. It was like honoring the program as, really being a successful program and opening doors for people. So to me, that was the best thing about it. And it was just, just a great moment. And I know Leon feels very much the same way.
Yeah. What has APSE meant to you, both personally and professionally?
Um, you know, Personally, I would say would be the more good, the side that I think of the most, because when I think about it, I more do tend to think about you know me and Dale By with the contest stuff, and like, where the hell is this one from? And I can't even read this stuff, Sandy, can you? And coming up with acronyms that meant that something was disqualified, so that if the editor came in, they wouldn't immediately start raising hell if we just were speaking in code with each other about the deputy sports editor or whoever put it together completely screwing up their entire entry packet. So but really just the folks and this, the support and the friendship, that was really an important thing to me with APSE.
What advice would you have for future presidents of the organization?
I really do think given the whole industry situation, I think that those who come in and get in that chain to run up to be ultimately president need to have a very clear vision of how to stabilize to the extent you can stabilize the financial situations, because it's just very much bigger challenge today than it was in the late 80s when I wasn't really even involved with it, but sort of the go-go 80s and the early 90s. I mean, it's just much more challenging. So it's great also to have a bigger paper behind you. I mean, I think if you're not at least at a mid-sized paper, it's just very, very hard, because your paper may be very, very happy that you're in this leadership role, but the finances, are just it's difficult. So I think that's seeing a way, having a vision for how to deal with the financial realities that the newspaper whole world is seeing. And if you have that vision, then good, then you're set. But I don't know what I would do there. I mean, grants and all that sort of thing are good, but it's a difficult situation.
Yeah.
And also when you have when your organization is so built around not just networking, which can be done remotely, but the concept of being together in one place multiple times. I honestly don't think I know another organization that still meets twice a year. I mean, I know the winter meetings are the contest judging, but that's something that can be done remotely. So I think sometimes hard things like that people won't like, if you say, well, no, we have to do this remotely, it's just way cheaper. And I don't know that it is or it isn't, but I would think it is. I think it's a very difficult time to be coming in and introducing things like that.
Yeah. Oh, tell me a little bit about what you're doing now.
Well, I'm still with ESPN. Started there. When I left SI, I did so because I had enjoyed SJI so much that I was interested in teaching. So I joined a program called New York City Teaching Fellows, where if you agreed to teach in a high needs public school, the city would pay for you to get your master's. Again, many things I don't check out thoroughly before I dive head first into them. Couldn't just get your master's in anything. It had to be education. You had to teach during the day and go to school at night. That was way more than I was looking to do all at once. But honestly, it's probably second only to SJI is the most rewarding thing that I ever did. I was in it for 2 years, and at the end of that, Don Squire offered me a job at ESPN, and I went there. I'm not full time anymore. I'm a recurring person, so I'm basically I've just worked college football for the last several years, and that's been great. I've enjoyed it, and it's also been good because it's given us a lot of different people to bring in to speak to the students. They get to hear about you know, what makes an interview special, and Tom Rinaldi teaches that. And you know, you have Lisa Salters stepping in and talking to them about news reporting. Michael Wilbon, who he and I practically grew up together, comes in and talks to them about, you know, not being lazy, and don't be on social media in the middle of the game. His class could just be called, and I think he does usually call it, "Just watch the damn game." So, you know, it's really been it's been enjoyable too. It's also been fun sort of to see how different parts of the sports media work. You know, real different, and yet real similar principles in TV.
Yeah. One thing I realized I haven't asked you directly about: what did it mean to you to be the first woman to lead the organization? And there'll be the fifth woman to lead the organization take over here at the next conference with Nyla Jean. And but yeah, what did it mean to you to become the first woman to be the president of APSE?
It really did mean a lot, because I think even though, like I said, the circumstances were a little bit unusual for coming in, I think that was important to Steve Doyle too. I think once people see something happen, they're less likely to think that all hell will break loose and the world will come to an end if it does happen. So yeah, I think it was great for the organization in general, and it's been really nice to see the number of folks who've come afterwards. Well, that's the problem of these things. But if I don't have it in, then my husband's like, "I don't want to listen to Greg Lee talking about X, Y, and Z."
Well, Sandy, thanks so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, not really. You know, I think, like I say, it's been a masterful job with the folks who've come in as president, particularly over the last, say, 10 years, because it's been a very, very challenging economic time. But it looks like the 50th celebration is going to be a really good one. So that's great, and I hope everybody has a terrific time and uses it as a springboard for 50 more.
Thanks again for your time, Sandy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was good. I enjoyed it.
Me too.